Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us today to learn some Lucidchart hacks. We have collected some tips and tricks that are going to help you be more effective in Lucidchart. This session will probably be anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour, and we're going to look at some different tips and tricks that we've collected from customers and things we've discovered internally while using Lucidchart. My name is Angie. I work in product education, and I will be your guide through the next hour of Lucidchart tips. I've decided on 3 separate themes for the tips that we're going to talk about. The first is tips around building fast and collaborating more. So what are things that you can do to get those diagrams created even quicker, be super efficient in the product? And then how can you use collaboration features like real-time collaboration, sharing, commenting to be more effective in the way that you're diagramming and communicating with your team? The next theme we'll look at is how to design prettier diagrams. Now, I know some of you are going to be tempted to skip this section. Please don't. This is not about fluffy, pretty, lots of colors diagrams. Instead, this is about some really simple hacks that can help your diagrams be more effective by using things like color, like font, legibility, background color, things that are going to help elements of the diagram really pop and make it easier for your audience to understand what it is that you're trying to say and to be more engaged in your documentation. The third thing that we're going to look at is how to automate and add interactivity to your Lucidchart diagrams. So this is going to be things like triggering different layers of a diagram to show up, so you can show current state or future state or different levels of complexity in a diagram. Things like adding links to get to external resources, and even things like we'll look at maybe how to add some data into your diagram and use conditional formatting to trigger different styles, colors, and those sorts of things so that you don't have to do all of that manually. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and pop over into Lucidchart. I'll just zoom out quickly here. All right, so this is a diagram that actually comes from a team at Lucid, our sister product, Lucid Press, where they were building out a new feature. And while we do use tools like Jira or Trello when we're building things at Lucidchart, this is an example of the engineering manager just taking a few minutes to outline his ideas for what needed to be completed, like what the steps were in order to finish this feature. So he got into Lucidchart, mapped out what his idea was of what needed to happen next, sent the diagram out to his team, asked for their insights. They were able to get into the diagram together, play with things, leave comments and notes, and then finalize what they all agreed was how this needed to work in order to be successful. Now, they did go ahead and take things a step further, which was that they added these swim lanes to kind of divvy up who was going to do what in the project. They also added these kind of faux swim lanes along the left that are showing different sprint cycles. And finally, they decided to use this color key to show who was completed with which piece in the build out. So instead of needing to constantly check in with each other to see what the status was of different pieces, you'll notice there are a lot of different dependencies inside of this flowchart. So in order for everyone to be as efficient as they could, they really needed to have an idea of what everyone else on the team was working on and completing so that they could be productive. So they just used this diagram as kind of a central communication hub for how things were going with this project and checking in with status. All right, so let's go ahead and look at a few tips and tricks that they used to make this diagram the fastest, easiest part of the project. The first thing I want to talk about is lines. So you'll notice that there are lots of lines crossing all over, leading all sorts of places here. Now, that may be something that you need in your diagram, and we're going to show you how to quickly do that. But for others of you, it might be a little bit annoying that Lucidchart does this. So it's not often that you probably want your lines to look like this. And there's a good reason for this. Lucidchart is noticing that you drew the line out of this point on the shape and you connected it to, the left side of this other shape. So it's maintaining those connection points. But there may be times that you really just want it to create a quick line in between two objects. You can do that in Lucidchart. So let's go ahead and zoom in. I'm actually going to use one of my favorite keyboard shortcuts, and this works on a Mac or a PC, is to press and hold spacebar while I zoom in or out using my mouse scroll wheel. You can also press and hold spacebar and then click and drag to move around the canvas. Okay, so let's delete that original line. And now what we're going to do is we're going to drag a line out again, but this time we're going to drag it just past the edge of the next shape until a blue halo appears, and then we'll drop it. Now, when I drag this shape around, you can see that Lucidchart is creating the most efficient connection between these two objects, which is oftentimes a really helpful feature to have on. So just again, very quickly, we're going to pull a line out just past the edge, drop when we see that blue halo, and voila. Now, if you do have lines that need to be more finite in where they're connecting, the thing to do is just hover your mouse over the edge of the shape, and you'll see this red node is kind of following my mouse wherever I go. When I click, it draws a line from that exact spot, and then same thing in my connection point. I can just drag my mouse along the edge of the shape and connect this line wherever I would like. All right, so there's some quick tips on lines. The next thing that I want us to look at is some options for customizing and making things more uniform in our diagrams. There are often times that I'm creating a flowchart and I want all the shapes to be uniform, but then I'll enter too much text in one shape, or there's just too much to put inside of one shape. It starts to spill out of the shape. Now I want to make everything bigger, but individually resizing every single shape and using these blue grid lines can be very time consuming. So I want to show you a faster way to get shapes to be uniform in their size and be equally distributed, aligned, all that good stuff. So we're going to use this shape color key to look at these features. I'll go ahead and zoom in closer here. All I'm going to do is select all of these shapes, come up here to the Arrange button in the File menu. You can also access these options by right-clicking on that shape group. And then I'm going to come down and I'm going to come to Match Size. I'm going to choose to match both the height and the width. Then I'm going to come back down and choose to align these objects so that they're all centered. And finally, I'll go ahead and distribute these objects vertically. Now I have a much nicer looking color key without having to resize each of those shapes individually. Now you may notice that sometimes you want to use the same feature inside of a flowchart. Like, let's imagine that we've got something that looks a little bit like this, right? Often that will happen as you're building things out or needing to add different stages of a process in between other things. So my recommendation to you here is to first lock your swim lanes to the canvas. That way you're not accidentally picking them up and resizing those as well. So I've selected my swim lane. I'm going to come up to the properties bar and select lock. Now I'm going to click and drag all of these objects. I'm going to come up to my Arrange menu once again and distribute these objects, this time horizontally. And if I want to move the text on this line, I can just click it, drag it, and move it wherever I'd like it to be. Easy. All right, a couple of other things while we're looking at swim lanes. This is how to make an edible gold fob watch, in case you were interested. My husband is a chef, so these are the things that entertain us sometimes. But I'm going to go ahead and unlock this swim lane because we're going to go ahead and look at some cool features around these swim lanes. All right, so now that this swim lane is unlocked, when I select it, I get the gray bar that appears at the top of the canvas and gives me some options for optimizing my swim lane. You're probably familiar with adding and subtracting lanes using this first option, but one really nice thing about swim lanes, and I'll just turn the magnet on. Usually this magnet is on by default, but what that means is when I change the orientation of my lanes, everything stays mapped to the correct swim lane. This magnet feature means that anything inside each of these swim lanes stays linked to that swim lane. Another nice thing to know about swim lanes is if I right-click on a swim lane, I get a bunch of options at the top of this menu that allow me to do things like insert different lanes, move lanes up or down, and that can be handy as well. All right, let's go ahead and bump back over now into our overall process. I did add the containers library you can see in the toolbox here on the left. This is where swim lanes live, and I can drag them onto the canvas. We also have some other containers, which I actually use these pretty regularly. For example, I will often use this just rectangle container shape to hold things like shape legends or keys. And what happens with this is You can see when I select the container, the magnet button in the properties bar is turned on. That means that when I click and drag this container, it picks up all the objects inside the container. So network architects love this feature because it allows them to kind of easily group objects that always belong together. But there may be some ways that others of you too could use this feature in your diagrams to just keep things linked together and organized. All right. From here, just a couple of other quick tips. I mentioned that it is good to lock things to the canvas once you're done kind of editing and adding those pieces. I'll go ahead and actually just to quickly show you a pain point that I often find. Imagine that I want to just move these bottom objects, metrics tracking, feature flag. I want to pick these up and I want to move them down into the next sprint. Do you ever have this happen where you're trying to move things around and you just end up grabbing all sorts of things that you don't want? Again, we're going to just click and lock. We're going to lock these to the canvas as well. Now, when I pick up these objects, it's easy to get just the pieces I want. Along the same lines, you may notice as you're moving things around in a diagram that sometimes instead of selecting things, you start drawing lines out of objects, and that's not necessarily what you want to do. So when you are done with your heavy build mode and you're more in a kind of finesse, moving things around a little bit mode, stylizing things, I recommend turning off that feature that drags lines out from everything. You can do that by coming over to the right, clicking on your page settings button, coming down, and under the lines section, you can turn off drag line from shape. Now, that means I'm not going to accidentally draw any lines onto the canvas. It does also mean that if I want to drag lines out from shapes, I can't do that. I either need to pull out an arrow or a line from the shape library or push L on the canvas, just the key L. And now I can click and drag a line onto the canvas. All right. Let's go ahead now and move to a different diagram and look at how you can use design tips to make your diagrams look a lot nicer. The example that we're going to look at here is one that's very, very different. This is really not a diagram at all, but what I really like about this example is that it's kind of a different use case. This is setting some goals for a quarter. It is filled just with dummy text, but when I originally saw this example, what the person had done is they'd used hot links to move into different diagrams that showed kind of clearer insights into what their plans were, what they wanted to build. In this case, it was a mock-up to a feature that this person wanted to build and work on this quarter. They did also add links into different pages of this diagram that showed kind of their thought process behind different goals or additional data. So now, instead of having just a static Excel document with a list of goals, they've got this really rich insight into the thought process behind things, different things to consider, all sorts of really robust information. It's also designed really nicely. So here are a few tips for how you might accomplish something like that yourself. The first thing has to do with color. You'll notice that the background color of this diagram is not the usual white grid that we're all used to. This is such a simple way to make a diagram look really sharp. To do this, you're going to come over to the page settings button on the right, and this color button here in the page settings at the top, if you click on that, that is going to change the color of the background in your diagram. So you can see it's really striking and an easy way to make things look really nice. The other thing you can do is you can turn grid lines on and off using the options under the grid section. So again, just turning those off makes things look pretty sharp. Another thing that's important to consider is color. So the shapes that are used in this diagram are really quite sharp. Now, I'm not a graphic designer. I know a lot of you are probably not graphic designers either, so I need a cheater way to find good colors. I can use the colors that are available here in the color picker options, but one hack that I like to use is I'll come up to the search bar here in the top of the toolbox on the left and do an image search. For example, This is the dive resort that I really would love to be visiting right now. So find something, a beautiful nature shot. Like we'll go ahead and grab this one. But an image, a photograph that you find particularly appealing. And then what you can do is you can come up to your color picker again and use this eyedropper tool to grab different colors from this photo. And that way you're going to get colors that look nice together or that aren't, completely off base. Nature is great at providing a palette that looks nice. So we've got this shape selected. I'll use my eyedropper tool and come down and grab this color blue. I can do the same thing for this shape. We'll grab this teal. And you can see that Lucidchart is adding these new colors to the swatches at the top as I move forward. And for this one, we'll go ahead and grab maybe a nice green. Anyway, so you get the idea here with using images and color pickers to quickly get some really nice colors across your diagram. All right. Let's go ahead and pop back into the summary page. Another thing that this diagram does well is fonts. So you'll notice that these are not the standard fonts that you see when you open My First Diagram in Lucidchart. Now, you've probably used the font picker before. It's here in the properties bar, but what you may not have noticed is that if you click on Manage Fonts, you actually have hundreds of fonts to choose from in Lucidchart. So if we wait here for a minute, these will all load. You can get an idea, a preview of what each of these different fonts looks like. You can turn any of them on in your diagram. You can also upload your own font. So if you have a brand specific font that you need to use, you can upload that here and use it inside of your diagram. All right, one final thing that I want to recommend is how to set up a diagram once with the fonts that you like, the colors that you like, and then use that again and again so that you're not having to do that every single time you start a new diagram. So for example, if we wanted to save some of these elements as just our standard branding for our diagram, what we would do is we would select somewhere off of the canvas. So we don't want to grab any of these objects. We just want to click somewhere that there isn't a shape. And then we can come up to the options on the properties bar and we can go ahead and do things like set a font. We can change the size. We can change a default shape color. We'll make this purple just for the sake of showing you. And then we can do things like change line styles if we want. Wait, when we do that, any object we drag out from the canvas in the future will have those design elements applied. We could also go through and select different colors to add them to this palette here at the top. And we could also go so far as to add special shape libraries. If we have any custom shape libraries that we've saved, we can definitely add those to our toolbox here. We can customize how the toolbox works by dragging these headings around. You'll notice that we're using the mind map special library here, which is one that is super popular. If you haven't used that yet, it's really easy. Has some great keyboard shortcuts to make it super, super simple to build out complex ideas. Anyway, let's imagine that now we've got this kind of set exactly where we want. We want every diagram that we create in the future to have these branded elements applied. What I would do from here is I would actually go back to my documents page. I would create a copy of this diagram. Nope, not that diagram, this diagram. So we'll create this copy. Now once we do, we're going to open this. And then I'm going to strip out any specific data. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete all of this. Maybe I still want that scale to appear, maybe not. I can delete all of these pages. You get the idea. Anyway, once I've got this set up, I've got my toolbox on the left looking exactly the way I want. I've got all the right colors set up. Anyway, once I do that, I can come back to my documents page once again. And now with this new diagram, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this More button and select Convert to Template. I can put it into any template library that I'd like, add a description, push Save. And now when I come back to this template or when I share it with my team, instead of getting the option to open this diagram, I'm selecting a new diagram. So I'm going to create a new diagram with those same settings applied. So this way, when I open the diagram, I've got the shape libraries that I want already here on the left. I've got the right font already loaded. I've got the colors that I want accessible to me here. The line styles are going to draw out the right way. So that way you're not having to set up your workspace time and time again. You do it once, you create a template, you're good to go. All right. The next thing that I want us to look at is looking at some custom shapes, some automation, some ways to make your diagram even more accessible and meaningful to others who are working with you. So let's go ahead and start by looking at this diagram. This is one that we actually saw from a customer, an Okta customer. He's a sales engineer, and he found that he was spending a lot of time describing really complex solutions to customers. He ended up reverting to using visuals to really help make what he was trying to explain a lot clearer to the people on the other end of the phone or on the other side of the WebEx. So when he found Lucidchart, he had new ideas for how he could even do this better. There were two things that he does really, really well that I think you may be able to use in your own work to help you save time and have more effective diagrams. The first thing that he did is he used templates, the feature that we just looked at, to create templates of things he used a lot. That way he had kind of some baseline documents set up that as he was talking to a customer, he could pull those up and then he could start building from there instead of creating from scratch every time. The other thing that he found is that he was frequently using customer logos and special shapes over and over and over again. So instead of using the search functionality to look up things like the Okta logo and pull them onto his diagram, he did that once. Then he turned on a custom shape library. So you see, I've already got one loaded. I'll go ahead and drag it up a little bit. You can turn those on by clicking on the Shapes button at the top of the toolbox. Scrolling down, you'll see there will be a custom heading at the bottom. Lucidchart has a lot of custom shape libraries, but you can come down to the bottom, name your custom shape library, push plus, save, and you're good to go. All right, so what was really helpful was as he found these special images and diagram shapes he's using, he could just drag them into the custom shape library, or in fact, you can go ahead and just right click on things. You can add it to a custom shape library. We can name it, so we could call this Adobe. And it adds it to that custom shape library. Line styles can be added. Anything can be added over into this custom shape library, even whole groups of objects. So if I select this whole group, I can drag that out and then I've got it there. Now when I create a new diagram, I can just drag these shapes directly out onto the canvas. And I can even, if I've taken the time to name them, I can do things like search for them. So now you can see my Adobe shape comes up in the search. I can share this shape library with my team and we can all use it to create standardized, beautiful diagrams. Now, the other piece that this person did really, really well and I think could be useful to others is that instead of talking to a customer, then creating a diagram, sending them the diagram, then getting their feedback and having all this communication take place asynchronously, be really time consuming, potentially get a little confusing, what he did was use an advanced sharing feature called Publish that allowed him to kind of work together with customers in real time, even if his customers didn't have a Lucidchart license. So if you want to share with anyone who does not have a Lucidchart license, pay attention. We're going to come up to the share button here in the top right, and we're going to click on Advanced. And from here, we're going to navigate down to the second option, this Publish option on the left. And you can see we have a couple of different possibilities for how we share our diagram with others. For us, we're going to use this first full document URL option and click Generate Link. Now, Lucidchart gives us a link. I can copy and paste it here, or I can just click on this hyperlink. And without logging into Lucidchart, I get full access to this diagram. It's view-only access. If you want someone to have more than view-only access, they will need to have a Lucidchart license and log in order to access the diagram. But In this case, all we want to do is have people see the diagram. So now, as he was walking through really technical solutions, trying to customize based on a customer's needs, he could be drawing out, we'll just make this really obvious, different objects onto the canvas. And the customer in this other tab, we can see this is what the customer is seeing. In real time, they're seeing those updates made to the diagram. So if I can just get my webinar tools to move, there we go. So this way you can really, really get some great functionality with showing people how something might work, communicating visually, even like digital whiteboarding, without even needing others to have a Lucidchart license. So super handy feature there. All right, let's go ahead and look now at how we can do things like add interactive links, automation, maybe some data linking and conditional formatting into our diagrams. To do that, we're going to go ahead and show you some just really quick examples of how this works, and then we'll dive into the specifics of how to achieve it. This is an example that's an AWS diagram, and we find a lot of customers who are building these sorts of diagrams often need to use them in a lot of different ways. In this case, different parts of this diagram applied differently to different groups of people. These can get really complex. So in order to keep things simple, the person who built this diagram went ahead and created different layers that he could turn on and off that kind of showed different levels or different facets of the diagram depending on who his audience was. So that way he could have a really kind of straightforward conversation with different audiences without needing to show them all of the components of the diagram. Here is another example. Actually, let's come back here and pull up our finished example. All right, so this is one where we've got a team. This is actually our customer success team at Lucidchart. And what we have happening in this diagram is we've got kind of a pseudo org chart showing how everyone reports up through different teams and managers. We also have everybody on the team working on a special project each quarter. So a little bit like a Scrum team where you might have, folks on the engineering team reporting up to a functional manager, but then they're also working on a different Scrum team with a product manager. And anyway, things can get complicated, right? We've got people working on all sorts of different things. What we did for this diagram to make things more automated, easier to get insights into who was working on what, is we went ahead and we added some conditional formatting to show different colors, and the legend is here, of what everyone on the team was working on as a special project, in addition to kind of these different segments and roles that they're in already. We also added a button to show, that is not the button. We also added a button, let's go ahead and turn that on to toggle layers. All right, added a button to show different people who would be coming on to the team. It looks like someone's been using my diagram. So this button then, depending on who the audience was, could show not only who the current team is, what projects they're working on, who they report to, but plans for growth as we move into the rest of the year. We've also seen a lot of great examples of people using this to show, here's the future, or here's the present process. This is how things work today. And here's the future process, or here's what I'm proposing, these different changes, and use layers to show the context of how those things differ and what they want to build. So with that said, let's go ahead and show you how to build your own layer. And then we can also go ahead and look quickly at how to add some conditional formatting to your diagrams. All right, so in this example, we don't have our diagram built, or our conditional formatting built out yet. We also don't have our layer built out. So what we want to do first is add a new layer to our diagram. This is going to be where we're going to put the future growth of the team. To do that, we're going to come over to the dock on the right, and we're going to click on this layers button about midway down, and we'll click on the plus layer button at the top of the panel. You'll notice there's a translucent overlay that appears, kind of a grayness over the canvas. This is indicating to me that I'm no longer working on my original diagram. I'm now working on this different layer. In fact, when I look at the bar at the top, I can see I'm not working on the page anymore, I'm working on new layer. And if I name this future growth, now the bar at the top tells me I'm working on the future growth layer. All right, so I'm going to pull out a couple of shapes. I actually saved these already in a custom shape library, so I will pull out a few folks who are going to be on the team. One thing that's great about layers is that if we needed to connect these shapes to other pieces on the canvas, like for example, let's turn on lines. If I wanted to connect this to a different shape on the page layer of the canvas, I could still do that. So layers can talk to each other as you're building them out. All right, so let's imagine that these are the folks that are going to be added to the team. I've got that ready to go. Now to get out of the layer, as you can see, I can press escape to stop editing this layer, or I can just double click anywhere outside of that group of shapes and get back to my original page. So now I'm seeing my original page data plus what I've added to my new layer. Let's open our layer again. We can use this eyeball icon to show and hide the layer. Now, I'm going to be presenting this out to my manager, so I don't want to show this layer until we get to the part of the discussion where we're talking about future growth. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that layer, and then I'm going to push this Sync Visibility button in the top right corner of the Layers panel. This means when I click that what I see right now is what anyone else will see when they first come to my diagram. So if I shared a view-only version of this diagram with my boss, this is what they would see when they first came into the diagram, which is great. That's how I want it to look. But I also want to make it easy for others to turn this layer on and off without having to give them instructions of go to the layers panel, find the eyeball icon, and then toggle that on and off. So let's go ahead and next create a button that will toggle this layer on and then off so that others can easily see the layer on and then off. So to do that, we're going to drag out any shape that we like. So we'll go ahead and drag out this regular old text shape. I'm going to change the color. I'll change the text so that it's white. And we'll go ahead and just, for the purposes of our presentation here, call this Click Here. Click Here. I will sometimes use the image or icon picker to, like, if I click for a mouse or like a finger pointer, I will sometimes use those to indicate that objects are clickable. All right, so now we want to add some interactivity to this shape. This is super easy. We're going to click on the shape, and then we can come up and click on this Link Actions button here in the Properties bar. This will add an action to this shape. Now, keyboard shortcut, you may be used to using either Command or Control K to add links to things in your email and documents. You can use that same shortcut here. So select your shape. For me, I'm on a Mac. I'm going to push Command K, and I'm going to automatically get this option to add this action. Super easy. Now you can see I've got lots of different options here. This is where you could add an external link. So if I wanted to point someone out to different documentation or a JIRA ticket, that can be done here. I can also link to a different page in my diagram, and we've seen lots of customers use this to put kind of a table of contents at the beginning of a really complicated process or a high-level process, and then use this link to page button to push people into sub-processes and make it really easy to navigate really complicated process maps without getting too much into detail just on one page. For us, we're going to go ahead and choose to toggle layers. So this button is going to turn our layer on and off. When I select that, I can see all of the layers that are in my document. In our case, it's just this one. I could layer more actions if I wanted this to do more things than just toggle these layers, but for us, we're going to push done. All right, now I'm going to push present mode so that we can see this the way that our boss will see this when we send a view-only version of the diagram. This looks super great, and when I click here, it turns my layer on and then off. Super slick. All right, last tip that we're going to look at for today is how you can add some conditional formatting to your diagram. So I will point you to YouTube to look at more details on how to data link your diagrams. These shapes are actually not filled with regular text. Instead, when I click on these shapes and then open my data panel, which is also here on the right with all the rest of the sexy features in Lucidchart, what you can see is right now there's nothing in this top field. When I click on any of these shapes, This shows you all of the data that I have associated with these different shapes. So go to YouTube tutorials, look for data linking Lucidchart tutorials, and those will show you how to bring information from spreadsheets or CSVs into Lucidchart and then link that into your shapes. Once you do that, you can use a whole bunch of really awesome functionality in Lucidchart to automate how your diagrams are working. All right, for us, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and use some conditional formatting to get these shapes to change color based on the information in our spreadsheet that tells us which special team each person is working on. So I've clicked on the conditional formatting button at the bottom of the panel on the right. Now I'm going to click Create New Rule. From here, I have some decisions about what I want to do. I can either change the shape formatting. So that's things like what color is the shape? How does the border look? Is the line style different? Which is awesome, right? We can change the way lines look. We can highlight critical paths. We can change border styles. We can do all sorts of things depending on the information in our shape. We can also choose an icon set. So in this case, we've got a bunch of different options to choose from that will be triggered depending on what the information is in our shape. For us right now, we're going to stick with shape formatting, and now we're going to tell Lucidchart what to look for when it needs to change the color of our shapes. In our case, we want Lucidchart to look at shape data. I showed you that each of those shapes has different data associated. So we're going to look at shape data, and then we're going to look at, tell it which heading in our data set to look at in order to know how to color our shape. In this case, it's the special team and projects folder. Heading. And then finally, I want it to look at whether or not that column contains each of these different special project teams. So first one is going to be automation. So if this special teams and projects heading contains the word automation, I want you to change the fill color of the shape. I'll use my eyedropper again to this dark gray. Okay, perfect. I'll double click at the top. I'm going to change the name of my role to automation. Bump back over, and now you can see here is my new role. Now, I like to be really, really quick about creating and applying these. So what I usually do is I'll create the role, come back to my diagram, use Command A, or just drag my mouse to select everything on my canvas, and then I will drag this role up so that it applies to everything I have selected. And when I release, you can see that certain of these shapes changed color. Now, I'm just going to show you one more because it's really quick. Once you've created one rule, it's really quick to create the rest. I'm going to click on this three dot button on the right of my rule, and then I'm going to push duplicate. And from here, we're going to call this one data. All we're going to do, because we want the exact same thing, except this time we want it to contain the word data, and we want it to change the color to this yellow. Can bump back over, do my same thing, select everything on the canvas, drag this roll up, and voila. Now we've got this one as well. So hopefully that gives you an idea of some of the things that you can be doing in Lucidchart. This is by no means an extensive list of tips and tricks. Presentation mode, where you can create kind of slideshows that are fully interactive in Lucidchart, is another great tip and trick we didn't get to. More keyboard shortcuts, other productivity hacks. Those are all things that you can find on our Lucidchart channel. So if you just go into YouTube and look for Lucidchart tutorials, you'll find playlists full of exciting other tips and tricks that we recommend for you in Lucidchart. Thank you so much for staying with me this whole time. If you have any questions, let us know at producted@lucidchart.com. In fact, I'll put it here, producted@lucidchart.com. And again, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for using our product. Let us know if there are any tips and tricks that you love in the comments, and we hope to see you again on a future webinar. Thanks.